Thank you very much to the University of Wales Trinity St. David and also to the Academy of Sinology for this opportunity to participate such a wonderful seminar. I feel truly humbled and honored to join and meet you online. Today, I would like to focus on education of children's communication skills in traditional China. And as we all know, language is essential for human connection and interaction. Around 3 months, the baby begins to communicate through cooing, laughing, and babbling, often using simple gestures. And by 10 months, they typically say the first word and begin forming simple phrases. And as they grow, they develop the ability to express themselves more clearly using complex sentences, asking questions, and sharing their ideas. But when do we start learning to communicate effectively with others beyond just language? So once young people leave the familiar environment of family and school and enter workforce, they will quickly realize that communication isn't only about mastering language, but more importantly, it's about the way we express ourselves. Therefore, to meet this need, many books today teach us how to speak appropriately in various social settings. And in my own research, I also came across some that provided very specific guidance and even scenarios for practice. But is there a way to prepare for this before the situation arises? Interestingly, in traditional China, when children still live in the family environments, parents took an active role in cultivating their communication abilities. And rather than just relying on books to teach communication, children would learn through the people around them. And this method was recorded in primers. So primers is the elementary education texts in traditional China. And if we look closely at these primers, we will find that the prevailing approach to develop communication skills in traditional China was speaking less. And it may sound counterintuitive. How can a child improve their verbal communication if they do not practice? Together, we will explore this puzzle during this presentation, and I will do so by examining 3 key areas: at home, at school, and in society. First, let's begin with the home environment. So when a child has developed basic language skills and start to become aware of the world around them, parents often use simple instructions to teach them the importance of speaking mindfully. And one of the most common phrases found in primers is actually an analogy. It says the mouth is the gate of fortune and misfortune. This vivid metaphor is something I remember my mother explaining to me when I was young. She said, a door allows people to enter and exit, and in the same way, the mouth speaks words which create fortune and misfortune. So speaking will result in distinct consequences. It can be positive or negative. If a person speaks inappropriate or hurtful words, one will let in misfortune. But if one speaks words of encouragement and care, good fortune will follow. So through this simple and effective analogy, a child can easily understand the importance of the speech and learn to think before speaking. Also, when I was young, my parents shared another saying with me. Interestingly, I discovered that was also included in the primers. And it says, talking much is not as good as talking less. Talking less is not as good as talking well. So, in this saying, talking less serves as a preliminary step toward talking well. And in essence, we can say that talking less is a means to the end of speaking more thoughtfully and effectively. So it seems like we back to our main question. How can speaking less improve our communication skills? So it's actually not difficult to understand. Just imagine like if we pause to stop speaking, our other senses, our ears, eyes, and nose will become more attuned. And the information gathered through these senses can help us to learn how to speak more effectively. But how can the information gathered through other perceptive senses can help us communicate? So, according to Peggy Post, who is an American author and etiquette consultant, writes in her book on conversational skills. She said, if there are two things for a good conversationalist to remember, they are think before you speak and listen. So, interestingly, she suggests the essential for good conversationalists are think before you speak and listen, and we will find that none of them need any verbal participation. Therefore, we can say that mastering communication skill is not just about linguistic practice, it also involves enhancing our ability to use other perceptive senses. And once children understand the importance of speaking thoughtfully, they become more cautious with their words. And at this stage, they start to practice listening actively and attune themselves to the needs of those around them. I will now share two instructions from Primus along with my personal experience to illustrate this point. And the first instruction I like to share is from a primer titled Guidelines for Learners, written around the late 17th century. And it encouraged children to actively listen to the parents' need. And it says, when our parents call us, we should answer them immediately. So I tried to put this instruction into practice, and I found that only by truly listening to my parents' needs and concerning the thoughts, such as wondering if they are worried about me or maybe they need help, could I respond immediately and appropriately. And I remember a specific time when my mother returned from the supermarket, calling my name and asking me to come quickly. I knew she wanted help with unpacking and cooking because she was tired, so I rushed to the door. She smiled and said, I'm so glad that I have you to help. So, by listening actively within the family, one can develop a considerate mindset, understand parents' need, and offer help with generosity. And another primer I like to share is from the late Imperial China. It is called Essentials of Knowledge on Children's Etiquette. It provides more advanced guidance on active listening. And it says, before the respected elders call for help, children should always perceive their emotions. And we can find this instruction goes beyond responding when called. It encouraged children to sense the emotions of the other person, even when no words are spoken. So, reflecting on my own experience, I recall that last year when I was living with my father, he would bake bread every week for our breakfast. And he is actually not a kind of person who is really talkative and he really expresses his need directly. And making enough for 7 meals is actually a big task that would take him the entire afternoon. And at first, I didn't notice his effort, and of course, I didn't offer assistance. But over time, I realized that sometimes he would stay up late making bread, which made it difficult for him to wake up early the next morning. So I understood then I should step in to help so he wouldn't be so stressed. So, from the two instructions in Primus, we can see that in the past, children were trained to develop the ability to actively listen and perceive the needs and emotions of those around them, starting with small moments like when they are called. Through practice, the ability expands, allowing them to sense the needs of others in various situations. And by the time children reach school age, the active listening skills allow them to interact thoughtfully with teachers and peers in the next phase of their lives. So now we can turn to the next stage, school. The ability to perceive the needs of family members at home forms the foundation for understanding the needs of others and speaking thoughtfully. And during this section, we will see that school-age children will start to express their perceptions through both actions and words with the teacher. And I will draw on one specific instruction from the Primus to illustrate this. So this instruction is actually found in many primers, guides students on how to ask questions of the teachers. And I like to highlight 3 key sentences and break them down into actions and speech. So in this slide, the 2 sentences with blue is actions, and 1 sentence with green is speech. So I will first read in its entirety and explain in detail later. So if there are points the student not fully understand, they should first ask senior student to avoid asking the teacher hastily in a disrespectful manner. And if they wish to ask the teacher, they should ensure the clothes and appearance are tidy, leaving the seat, and usually it's meaning to stand up, and say, I do not understand this matter or this book. May I kindly request your guidance? And when the teacher responds, the student should listen carefully. Once the question is answered, the student should return to the seat. And we can observe 2 key actions in this instruction. I will first talk about the first action. So the first action is about before directly asking the teacher, students are encouraged to ask the senior student. And this approach actually has several benefits. Firstly, the senior student possesses more experience in learning, making them a more efficient resource when the teacher is not readily available. And secondly, the discussions with senior students help to specify and narrow the question, thereby improving clarity when the student asks the teacher later. And the second action is to listen attentively when the teacher responds. So, from my personal experience as a university student, I've found that the active listening skills I developed in my family environment has been truly useful when I was interacting with lecturers. So at times, lecturers use indirect language in the responses to preserve students' self-esteem and avoid placing too much pressure on them. Therefore, it's only by paying attention to these subtle cues that one can uncover more than just direct answer, allowing for genuine improvement and growth. So we discussed about 2 key actions. Now is speech. So this instruction highlights how children's development of listening skills at home positively impacts their communication beyond family. And a key example is when students ask a question, they are instructed to specify the matter or book they do not understand and humbly request guidance. And this approach underscores 2 important aspects. First is the clarity in the phrasing of the questions, which ensures the teacher isn't confused, and the humble tone, which reflects respect and, more importantly, help students foster a mindset of humanity. And I also find some researchers suggest that such humanity is positively correlated with academic success. And in terms of speech, I would like to highlight the careful choice of words and tone is actually a direct result of the considerate mindset cultivated within the family environment. So at this stage of life, we can clearly observe how children's listening and perception skills develop at home benefit the school experience, and is especially evident in the transition from the active listening to thoughtful speaking, as we can see the student apply these skills in classroom interactions. And now let's move on to the final area, society, and explore how children express the thoughtful mind through speech. In this section, I will reference two guidelines from a primer called Essentials of Daily Etiquette to highlight two crucial aspects of conversation. First is when to speak, and the second is how to speak. So first is when to speak. The right time to start a conversation can also be more important than the way we speak. And this primer suggests when others are talking, do not interrupt them. And this advice actually can apply to many situations, whether you are asking directions while others are chatting or trying to get your friends' attention when they are busy on the phone. And it is clear that when people are speaking, they have their own matter to discuss, and interrupting them may show that we are prioritizing our own feelings over theirs. And just like children develop ability to perceive their parents' and teachers' emotions, both at school and at home, listening to others becomes second nature. And we also discussed before, the school-age children first seek help from senior students before directly approaching a teacher. So the mindset of not disturbing others carries over into the social situations. And in this case, silence speaks louder than words, which showing a mentality of care. And the second is how to speak. Well, there are many instructions on the way to speak. Let me just highlight one. This primer suggests when meeting a disappointed person, do not boast about oneself. And when meeting an elderly person, do not talk about death or aging. And Peggy Post also echoes this situation. She values the sensitivity to others' feeling, and she states, if you are sensitive to others' feeling when you speak, that is, you possess the admirable quality known as tact. And she further provides several examples to illustrate this point. She said, you won't talk to your grandmother about how you dread getting old, or a wheelchair user about how much fun you have skiing. And we just returning to the primer's advice, the key takeaway in this advice is not speak about things that others already concerned about, whether it's internal, such as the disappointment of a person, or external, like the inevitability of death and aging. And as this is the final piece of advice we will discuss today, I want to use this instruction as a summary of the steps of speaking. So there are mainly two steps to thoughtful communication, input and output. And the first is input. Before speaking to someone, we try to understand the emotional state. For example, they are in a low mood. And the second is output. Based on our perception, our minds guide us to say the most appropriate words to improve the situation and not make others feel worse. So whether we are interacting with an elderly person or anyone else, this process remains the same. So over the past 20 minutes, we explored how a child's perceptive mind, cultivated within the family, supports the interaction both at school and in society. And I like to do a little summary here. In the pre-modern China, parents placed great importance on teaching children the value of speech, encouraging them to be sensitive listeners by not speaking too much, and perceptive to others' needs, mindful in their communication. And this considerate mind cultivated at home becomes a guiding line in communication, both in school and in the society, making children considerate and thoughtful communicators. So this is the way how speakingless can say more. And although today's topic focused on traditional Chinese education, principles we've discussed can also be applied to others, because becoming a skilled conversationalist just starts by being attuned to the smallest moment. So to conclude this presentation, I would like to share a story from the pre-modern China. This story happened in the 7th century before the Common Era. The ruler of Fugao visited the state of Qi, and the Duke of the state of Qi asked him how a ruler should govern his people. And the ruler of Fugao did not reply with word. Instead, he touched his lips with his hand, grasped his collar, and then pressed his hand against his chest. And by noticing these gestures, the Duke asked, "Do you mean that a ruler should share hunger and cold of his people?" The Duke thought to himself, "He considers me a sage, so he showed me the answer without speaking." Because of this, the Duke gifted the ruler of Fugao 1,000 pieces of gold. So in this short story, the ruler of Fugao answered the question through silent gestures. However, the Duke, by carefully observing these postures, discovered the hidden meaning. And it was possible because he focused his attention and attuned his mind to the conversation. So we can see that a skill children develop in family environment importantly applies to social interactions generally. And by cultivating attentiveness and consideration, we can develop a thoughtful mind and become thoughtful communicators. So that's all I have time for. Thank you for your time, and I hope you find these insights helpful.